Hi there, I'm David Batsoffen and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. Now, when I go away, I do like to take a good book with me rather than take a Kindle, which I do not possess, and I don't want to steal my wife's. And on a recent trip, I took this particular book with me, and today I'm very lucky to be chatting to the author, who is Dr. Anne Biccard. Dr. Biccard, welcome to In Conversation With, and thank you for joining me so very early and in scrubs.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
May I call you Anne?
Yes, please do. That's my name.
Thanks so much. And firstly, thank you so much from all of us. I don't like generalizing, but in 2020, I think it is only pertinent that on behalf of South Africa, I say thank you to you and your colleagues who have been in the front line of COVID on a daily basis for the last, what has it been, 8 or 9 months?
Yeah, it's been a hectic time for all of us.
Firstly, what got you into medicine, and more specifically into emergency room medicine? Why didn't you go and become a dermatologist? It's much safer.
It is much safer. So I actually started out with the intention to do law and then did English at varsity, and then I did psychology. And then I went all the way back to the beginning and did medicine. So after 13 years at Wits, there was no option of me specializing in anything. I needed to get to work. So in those days, working in the emergency department was not a speciality. It was something that people just did in between other jobs. Now it is an actual speciality, like you become a surgeon or a gynecologist or whatever else you become an emergency room physician. But when I qualified, it was just something that I started doing and found myself quite good at and have just stayed in it.
I mean, you've been doing it for 30 years. And you're
25. Yeah.
Sorry?
25.
My apologies.
Almost 30 years. It feels like about 130 years.
I was going to say, after 2020, I think people can add at least 15 years to a CV just for 2020 alone.
Exactly. And when you work in the ED, 1 year is like dog years. 1 year for you guys feels like 7 years for me.
When your first day in the emergency department, at the end of that particular day, firstly, do you remember your first day in the ED?
I do. So also things have changed quite a lot in medicine. Now there's a compulsory community service, which I think actually prepares doctors in a way better than what we had, which was one day you're a medical student and the next day you're the doctor in charge. So from going to the person who stands at the back of the ward round and has absolutely no say over anything, suddenly you're the person who must decide what to do. And I do remember that day very clearly. I was very aware of the fact that I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, I was doing my best, but I didn't really have any criteria. Now things have got a lot more protocols. There's a lot more structured teaching. The emergency department's actually run by an emergency department. I mean, in our day, if you were rotating through medicine, you were in charge of any medical admission. So you had to decide what to do with them. My general rule was if they came in on a stretcher, they stayed in the hospital. If they walked in, they could walk out. I don't think that that's the best approach to medicine, but that was how I started out. And I mean, I remember thinking that it's a bit like, it's like jumping into a river. You get to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and you're standing on the bank and there goes the river, and then you jump into the river and the rest of the day just goes past and you get spat out on the other side and you don't know where the day went. It's just like tumultuous. You don't have a minute outside of that. It's an all-consuming kind of place to work, especially in a government hospital, which is constantly busy. At 4 o'clock in the morning, there's still a queue of people waiting to be seen. So I do remember that. I'm certainly a lot more mileaged now, and I work with a lot of younger doctors who I can see have exactly that same big-eyed look. There was one young fellow who literally followed me around to the tea room everywhere. I mean, I went to the bathroom and he opened the door. I said, "Stop following me." He's like, "Don't leave me."
At the end of that first day, Anne, did you sort of sit down and go, "Really, this is what I chose to do? I could have been a contender, but no, I chose to do emergency medicine"?
So I certainly, one's house job is a very difficult time. And I certainly remember thinking after about 3 or 4 weeks that I didn't think I could keep this up for a year. We were on call every third night. So you'd work every third day, you'd work through the day, through the night, and through the next day, which you can kind of do for a week or two. And then it really starts to wear you down. You just become chronically exhausted. And sort of 5-6 weeks in, you just think, I can't do this for a year. It seems impossible. But the thing is, you're in it, and you spent all those years at university. And I mean, I love medicine. So, I just had to, the image that I sort of, what is the word they use now? Channeled. It's a new word, but I still did it in that year. Was sort of a 4-wheel drive in low gear, I didn't try to make any sort of rally finishes. I just trundled along, kept at it, keeping my nose above the water.
Do you feel now, looking back at the beginning of your career and then looking back at the beginning of 2020, that there is some sort of similarities between the two? Because you'd left that chaos behind at the beginning of your career and you'd settled into the career. And now all of a sudden 2020 arrives and you're faced with that sort of mayhem and madness all over again.
So I think the ED can always be like that. At any one time, it's like a wave arrives at the door. So it's almost like a bus of people have arrived. And especially if there's a sort of a hype or a high energy. So even after working in the ED for 25 years or 30 years, I think you still have a little sort of nervousness in your heart about what could happen today. And there are times when the place is completely chaotic and there's people on every bed and people stashed in the linen room and just general chaos, and the ambulances are ringing the bell and the phones are ringing and everybody's trying to speak to you at once. So that side of it has always been there. I think that the similarity with 2020 is that I could honestly say that I didn't know what to do. What was the protocol? Right. We were learning every day. The rules were changing every day. The physicians were saying, we don't know. We're not sure. We're not sure if we should ventilate this patient. We're not sure if we should take chloroquine or not take chloroquine. I mean, when the whole chloroquine idea came out, somebody gave me a tablet and said, you must take this chloroquine if you're going to work in the ED. And I put it in my pocket and then promptly forgot about it. And it went through the wash and that was the end of the chloroquine. But then the next week they said, don't take the chloroquine, whatever you do. I was like, oh, dodge that bullet. So there was a lot of I don't know. There was a lot of uncertainty. But we were lucky in South Africa for a number of reasons. The one is that we're 3 months ahead of the rest of the year, 3 months behind the rest of the year. So we're ahead of them in terms of what they've learned they can pass on to us. And we also have a fantastic work ethic still in our government service who have kept up with the protocols, kept the thing running, and have just been remarkable. And it's what I've always said about South African medicine. It's a fantastic work ethic and fantastic keeping up with academic things, always being ready to learn, ready to make changes in policy if need be, without going through a whole long rigmarole, you know. So we're really lucky.
So let's get to the real reason for me chatting to you. We've been having a wonderful sort of backstory to the book, and it's called Saving a Stranger's Life. I like the fact that you've done all. Let me pick an adjective to slot in over here. So tell me about the birth of the book. What made you sit down? I mean, you've already got an incredibly busy schedule, and this is not a book that has taken you 3, 4, 5 years. This is a book that you put together very quickly. It's been published in the same year that it's been written, and now you still have to, as we've said earlier, you're still on duty. How did you find the time, Anne?
So the ED sometimes is quiet, and obviously you have to be on duty and on your toes. So I write quite a bit if I'm like on a late shift, if there's a lull. Funnily enough, only work when I'm actually in the ED. That chaos sort of pleases me. So some days I don't write a word because it's busy and obviously I have to see the patients first. And other days, especially at the beginning of COVID, we were all ready. We didn't know what we were ready for, but we were ready. And there were no patients at all. So I started writing the book actually before COVID, but I had quite a lot of time to sort of edit and think about stuff during the first 2 months of COVID, when we were literally the emergency department was seeing a tenth of the number of patients. You still have to be there and wait for them. And I'd always sort of wanted to write a book. A lot of my colleagues said, "Oh, you must write a book, and about your sort of stories and things." But the thing that precipitated me to write it was that I worked at the same hospital for about 22 years, and then made a decision to move to a different hospital, which turned out not to be a bad decision. I mean, I learned a lot. It was a completely different culture, a completely different hospital, but the change was very hard for me. My colleagues at the hospital that I worked at are dear friends, actually, and I miss them a lot. So I thought I'd better write about them. And so I told the story of not only of that hospital, I mean, of lots of different hospitals that I've worked on but the thing that really drove me to start putting pen to paper really was that I wanted to capture what the last 22 years had been. Mm. I felt a little like I was in exile,
I like
self-imposed exile.
Self-imposed exile. I love the names that you've come up. I'm just trying to, I kept, there was some guys, the name that you had, the names that you had given your colleagues. Obviously, you don't want to name names for a variety of different reasons, but there was one, Devil Sugar was the one, and I know what you're alluding to, but I mean, the names that you've given your ex-colleagues are very funny. Did you discuss this with them before you wrote the book, or did you just go ahead and think, well, if they figure it out, they figure it out?
Exactly the latter. Some of them did. I've quite a lot of my colleagues have actually bought the book and have come along and said, "Is this me? I know who this is, But I changed people's gender and their age and all that. And also, mostly what I write about my colleagues is positive. I wouldn't like anybody to read the story and feel like I was criticizing them or being negative about them.
Yeah.
So I can be a little sarcastic maybe, but I wouldn't put something that would be harmful,
Yeah.
So I don't mind if they recognize themselves, but I wouldn't like to expose them, or my patients for that reason. So I also change their genders in the context of that quite a bit.
You also have a way with, you made me laugh out loud on several occasions. Alcohol is brain typics, is one of those sort of things. And you were alluding there to a fellow who fell off a balcony and arrived at your ED with 2 broken legs. Nobody could remember what happened, but they thought it was hysterical.
Yes, alcohol does take the edge off. And certainly, during lockdown, that kind of thing we stopped seeing. Yeah. So, in terms of people have often asked me about, what I think, and certainly in terms of stopping people drinking in public places, cut the numbers of trauma down, because, when there's too much alcohol on board, people think it's a good idea to do whatever they are going to do, I mean, I have a few sort of general rules, like don't go on the roof if you don't have wings, and don't try and start the fire with anything other than a fire starter, Don't throw petrol on it or whiskey. But those kinds of things we see regularly in ED, and there often is alcohol involved, and it is dangerous.
Unfortunately, and also small children. I'm amazed this particular incident was around that 5-year-old who was trying to dictate what and how she would interact with you. I'm amazed Propofol didn't feature a lot more or ketamine in trying to subdue these people into a state of willingness.
Well, the thing is, Propofol is a great drug. The problem is you have to give it intravenously, and to get up a drip on a non-compliant 5-year-old, it's a little easier to just give them syrup. And of course, ketamine's become a lot more fashionable now. I mean, all the doctors call it Special K, and it's kind of a little more stable to use. But yes, it is sometimes quite tempting to just give them a bit of anti-shout, intravenous anti-shout.
Anti-shout, I like it. Listen, if push comes to shove, there's always M99, which they use to dart wildlife with. You can use that in the ward.
Dart them.
Dart them, yes. Are there, the other thing that was of interest to me, and as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm married to a medical doctor, And she explained to me that a lot of times in the ED, you have no closure when it comes to your patients, because they come in, you see them, and you move on. And then when you come back on duty, they've gone either upstairs to a different ward, or they've died, or they've gone home. And how is that for you as a doctor, not having that closure? Does it matter?
So it is. Well, if you know your colleagues and you work closely with them, you always sort of find out. So if you have somebody that you engage with or a difficult case, I'll text them or, send them a WhatsApp saying what happened with that chap or whatever. So you don't want to bother them the whole time on the phone, but I do sometimes, want to get closure. I mean, I had, quite often have asked the physician what was going on there, because I'm actually not sure, you know. But yeah, it is sort of moving from one exciting thing to the next. And one of the people who edited my book, I can't remember, or first read my book, asked me if I ever do a full day's work. I said, yes, I do a full day's work. They say, you seem to just come to work and then, sort of do all these exciting things and go home,
Yeah, right.
But you do follow up on things, and definitely it's a learning curve, because if you don't follow up on stuff, you don't realize things that you missed or that you should have thought of or whatever. I mean, unless it's a simple thing and the patient goes home and there's closure, but they're always welcome to call or give me feedback. And I often will say, give me a shout and tell me what the specialist says,
You mention in the book a 10-year-old that purportedly drowned in a bath. And maybe I missed something, but even I didn't get closure on that one.
And, well, I still don't have closure.
Okay.
So
I thought maybe I'd missed something.
No. So in terms of forensic pathology, they send off specimens for toxicology and that kind of thing. And it can take years, literally years. And if you don't have a contact there, you'll never hear what happened. I don't think the family will come back and tell me. But I actually did follow up. I have a colleague who works in forensic pathology, and I actually have called her a number of times to ask, because I was really flummoxed by that case. But there was no answer. There was no obvious cause. So the pathologist also didn't know what was going on. And they said they thought it was some kind of toxin or drug ingestion, which I thought was crazy at 10, but the pediatricians tell me it's not unheard of. So.
Okay. And do you have a case that sort of stands out, that is the most memorable, either for good, bad, or indifferent reason?
Sure. I think certainly in terms of COVID, the cases that I remember, first of all the people who wanted to get tested for COVID, who drove us completely insane. They all lined up because the government said you must go for screening. And so everybody arrived for screening, and they opened their mouths and said, do the swab. And we were like, no, you don't need the swab. You're screening, not testing.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And certainly, in terms of COVID, the first real COVID pneumonias that I saw, very memorable, because we knew it was coming. And when you see it in the flesh, it's pretty frightening, And then, pretty much, the people who you snatch back, my opponent Grim, when they have a grip on the one side of the bed and I have a grip on the other. Those are the patients that you really remember. There's one chap who I literally snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. He still brings me a bottle of wine once a week, once a year on that day.
Right.
He said he's got 2 birthdays, the day on which he was born and the day on which he was dead, and we revived him. So that's a nice story, and it's quite an emotional thing for me. Because often patients don't come back and say thank you. They probably don't want to have anything to do with the ED, especially if it's a negative memory for them.
Yeah.
But it's really nice for me if patients come back and say thank you. Actually, here I am.
Yeah. And with a bottle of wine, that's always good.
Yeah, and the bottle of wine it's a nice bottle of red too. He doesn't. He's not reticent in putting his hand in his pocket, so that's always nice. But of course he doesn't need to do that. Just knowing that it all fell together, and that that that's what we did all the preparation for. We've been on all the courses. We've done 100 simulations for that one person who comes along that goes smoothly. you know. And it's nice when people appreciate that it wasn't just random chance, you know.
Yeah. You didn't just wander in and go, oh, so that's what it is.
Yeah.
I'll just do this and boom, you'll be fine.
Yes.
When that happens, when you pull one back, do you sort of do a fist bump and go, gotcha? Or do you just go, all right, I saved one. I don't want to tempt fate here, so we're not going to poke the bear.
No, yeah, we definitely don't want to attract the attention of the evil eye in any way.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to spit 3 times and avoid any kind of arrogance around
Yes.
around Grimm. But it is nice, and sometimes, you know, I mean, a few months ago, actually, just when lockdown started, we had a young security guard who was shot in a robbery.
Mm.
And that was the kind of one where I knew Grimm had won that one. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I had to try. He was only like 22, but there was no. Once you start doing CPR on a trauma victim who's bled out, you really have got nowhere to go.
Mm.
And I even said to the surgeon, can't we take him into a laparotomy? And he just looked at me and said, his heart has stopped. Like, are you crazy? You know?
Yeah.
And I was desperate to try anything to not let that one go to Grimm,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, you win some, you lose some. Well, you always lose in the long run to Grimm.
Yeah.
But it's nice to chalk up a point every now and again.
Death and taxes, and for people who watch too much medical or too many of the medical dramas on TV, it's not quite like that, is it? It's I should imagine very, very different from what we see in ER or Grey's Anatomy or any one of those TV shows.
I haven't watched a lot of those shows, to be honest. I don't have a TV, so I'm a bit out of the loop in terms of them. But the little snippets that I've seen, it's not really like that. You know, you work with different staff every day. Quite often, you know, there's quite a lot of chaos. You know, people are asking for different things. There may be 2 or 3 doctors trying to do the resus at the same time, and sometimes you don't agree. So it can be a little bit chaotic. But emergency medicine has become a lot more formalized. There are a lot more protocols. There are a lot more... you know, there are a lot more courses with standard approaches to things, which is very helpful because, you know, often when somebody comes in using cardiac arrest, especially if it's a young person, people panic. And if you panic, you don't think of stuff, you forget things. So as I write in the book, you know, the H's and T's, you have to go through that list and try and figure out what's going on. You can't just go, oh my goodness, you know, and have sort of cognitive failure. That doesn't help anyone, least of all you and the patient.
The book, as we said earlier, is called Saving a Stranger's Life. It's published by Jacana. I'm assuming that it's available both in bookstores and online, Anne?
Yes, yeah, it is.
It was a wonderful read. As I said to you earlier, I read through it twice and enjoyed it even more the second time round. For non-medical people, I think it'll give you an insight into what an emergency department is all about and what our emergency doctors go through on a daily basis. And once again, Anne, thank you for taking time. I know that you're on call as we speak, so thank you for taking time to join me, and thank you once again for your time and your dedication. My guest today on In Conversation With has been Dr. Anne Biccard, who is the author of Saving a Stranger's Life, which is published by Jacana. And once again, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.